welcome to Indy Eye. I'm Michelle Pini, and our special guest today is Stephen Koukoulas. Stephen is a leading economist and an independent Australia columnist. He is managing director of market economics, a former Citibank chief economist, economic advisor to former Prime Ministers Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard as well. Welcome, Stephen.
Great to be here.
So now, of course, there's so much going on, both in the local and global economic stage at the moment, and there's also a federal election coming up. How important do you think the economy will be in this coming election?
Yeah, I'm looking at it in two different ways. There's the sort of macro economy, that is the overall unemployment rate, the inflation rate, things like economic growth, aggregate wages growth, these sort of things which are the domain of the Treasurer, the Finance Minister, and the Reserve Bank, it must be said. And there's the economy according to the voter. And those two things can be very different.
Yes.
And by that I mean when we look at the macro economy, and in fact, I think our macro economy is really good. 4% unemployment rate, that's fantastic compared with any long run history. Wages growth at 3.5, inflation's down to 2.5. So yes, it's only in the early stages of getting real wages going back up, but we're on the path to an improvement in real wages. So that's good. However, and by the way, we've got two budget surpluses to the extent that they matter, and they sort of do. I'm not obsessed by budget surpluses and deficits, but it's sort of one of those things that's nice to have.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well,
if
it's a political nice thing to
it's
have,
more
isn't
political than economic,
it?
yes.
Yeah.
Although it is economic, if the economy is strong and overheating with high inflation, you probably do want to have a budget surplus. If the economy is weak and falling in a great big hole, having a deficit, absolutely appropriate too. So that's just by the way. But the what do we call it? The lived experience, and that's where people vote. They don't necessarily care too much about the fact that real wages have gone up for the last 12 months, but
Mhm.
they notice that that what they used to pay for things has gone up relative to their income, and that's still the case, even though we're getting these aggregate numbers turning
Yes.
around.
Yep.
Um, they're noticing that things like housing affordability might not be great, so rents are high. Uh, even though they've got a job, they're sort of feeling or part feeling, but also part perceiving that things aren't as good as they could be personally, financially, economically, and that's what's going to sway at least a few people on election day.
But do you think though, so you're saying that it's quite, it is going to be an election issue, the economy
Yes.
as such, and usually is, but would you say it would be equally so if we currently had a coalition government?
Look, I do think so. The economy does matter to people, and it's an easy one for an opposition or a government when times are good to campaign on because they can sort of point to a few things for the people who are maybe marginally attached to the voting system. Most of the time, they don't care terribly much. They probably get a little bit sort of brought into the equation because they have to vote, which is a good thing. And so they sort of think about what do I really want as a voter for my economy. And again, it can even be down to the local electorate issue, like is there a school crossing and things like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
swaying their votes. But look, the economy, yes, it still does matter. And I think this is where Labor are trying to position themselves, as far as I can read it, is that,
Yeah.
okay, here we are. This is what's been the last 3 years of the Albanese government. And here's we've got inflation back down, wages growing,
Yes.
all those things that I mentioned before. But what about the next 3 years? What will Dutton do? And so, even though this is more than just an economic issue, the renewables. So, is it solar and wind versus nuclear? Heaven forbid. So that I dare say that'll be an issue, but it is an economic as well as an environmental and a budget issue. To be frank, yeah, it's a lot of money.
Well,
So there's things like
yeah.
that which will prop up, that will sway some voters, no doubt.
Well, I won't, you probably know Independent Australia's position on nuclear, but do you think there is any merit to having a nuclear policy as part of the mix?
No.
Okay.
I don't, look,
Just in case we miss something.
no, look, from where we are now, no. Look, if had Australia had a nuclear legacy from 40 or 50 years ago and there was an add-on we could do or something, it would only be then a maybe. But when you're starting from scratch with no infrastructure, no nuclear background, that means expense. That means time taken to get the thing up and running. And that's the other thing. But even on the most optimistic expectations that I've seen, well, the first of these little nuclear reactors,
Yeah.
will take at least 10 to 12 years to be
I think
functional.
it's
And
more
then, as I
like
understand, even the whole seven,
15.
when they're up and running, that Dutton's talking about, they're going to be supplying 4% of all of our power needs. Well, that's just a couple of windmills and a few solar panels and a few rooftop solars that'll supply 4% of Australia's power needs. So why
Yeah.
not spend that, what is it, $600 billion on, or a fraction of that
Oh,
on those things?
stop talking logic. So, but the thing about the thing about that though is really what's at the heart of it, perhaps, as far as, well, certainly my editorials have suggested, is to maintain the, fossil fuel industry, which will be required if we were to go down the nuclear path, because, of course, there wouldn't be any more investment in renewables. So, do you think it's fair to say that it's more a political issue rather
Oh,
than a real answer to Australia's energy needs?
Well, I think clearly yes, and it's something that Dutton can talk about as being able to differentiate himself from Albanese and on that particular policy, which is a hot button issue. It has to be said that people do feel very passionate about it in all different ways. So that's fine, but I think that the lack of substance behind the policy proposal, as it's been released to public scrutiny, is pretty thin on the ground. And even the costing that we're talking about, it's pie in the sky. And even though they've got a couple of, reasonably well-credentialed economic groups to sort of model it and price it and these sort of things, I've been around long enough to know that these economic modeling and costings of these things is just well, it's a crapshoot. It could be any number really, and we know that any big policy issue always blows out in cost, always takes longer than you think to develop. And I think that it's unrealistic, and I just hope that it sort of dies away as something that's just a sort of a crazy idea that
Pie
has
in the
little merit.
sky.
We go about things that do actually work. And the other thing is to look around the world and see what other. I think the market will actually beat Dutton anyway. So even if he wants to build these things, it'll just be so unaffordable. And given the progress that's being made on the efficiency of renewables and critically, the critical issue that everyone talks about is storage. We
Yep.
need bigger, better, more reliable batteries. Of course we do. Yes. Once we get that problem solved, well then nuclear and the fossil fuels will be out the window and we'll be all fine. It's just a matter of that the batteries are getting bigger and better. That's true
Yep.
from where they were 3 years ago, 5 years ago, let alone 10 or more years ago. Give it another 5 or 10 years, I think we'll be able to make considerable progress without this nuclear issue that Mr. Dutton's going on about.
Well, before we get to some of those policies in the election, I guess in greater, if you want to go there in terms of greater
Yeah,
detail, um, what about, you've been an advisor to at least two, I think, is that right? Two former
yeah, yeah.
governments. Yep, economic advisors. So, how important would you say that uh, the person at the helm, so the Prime Minister and of course the Treasurer, is in managing Australia's economy, or does it really come down to the caliber of their economic advisors, without sort of pushing your own barrow? Is it
Yeah.
really that important, or does it depend?
Um, I'll take a step back with that one too, because I think what matters more to the Australia's economy is what happens in China, in the US, and around the world than what happens in Canberra, for example.
Mm,
Because if the Chinese economy goes up or down or whatever, and the US economy, heaven forbid, with Trump in charge now does extraordinary things, well, that'll have a much bigger implication than any decision taken by either side of politics in Canberra. I think that's
right.
well, just one background, but it's how you, as the Australian government, the Prime Minister or the Treasurer in Australia, react to those external shocks. And we've had a few of them over the last decade or two. The global financial crisis, the pandemic, and now we've got the Trump issue. So the question that if I was happened to be back in those jobs,
Yep.
I'm not interested in, by the way. I'm too tired. But if I was in those jobs, I'd be sort of working through the issues that what does it mean for us in Australia if there is a not just an early sort of shuffle on the tariff war, but if it does really blow up, and that's not whether we're exempt from our steel to the US, that's trivial. That's almost immaterial. What's going to be more important for us is that if China and the US escalate their tariff policy, and even if we're exempt, we'll be caught in the backwash because the disruption to global trade to global economic growth will be so big, will be
Yes.
so severe that we'll be caught in that, even though we're not directly impacted by any tariffs that from either of those countries. Throw in the Eurozone, which is, people keep forgetting that the Eurozone as a whole is about roughly the size of the US economy. It matters. So, given that they're going through an incredible amount of economic and political turmoil in many of the economies over there, that you'd be sort of thinking, what do we do to insulate ourselves? And that includes things like how do we spend money to sort of cushion our industry? How do we create tax policy that's fair and equitable? How do we address other issues that will be caught if we're caught in the backwash and the economy weakens? What do we do about it?
And so, okay, Trump is really, it's that open-ended question, isn't it? Because it's
Yes.
unpredictable what he's going to be doing.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say. And certainly at the moment, he seems intent on getting his way any way he can by introducing all sorts of tariffs in all kinds of areas. And how, is it possible for someone, a country the size of Australia to navigate that in a positive way, or are we really beholden to what his next decision's going to be?
Yeah. Look, I think we are. There's only so much we can do to insulate ourselves. So the short answer is there's not much we can do. And that is because they are such a dominant player in the global economy and even our global markets.
Yeah,
It's rare. I love financial markets. I love the stock market, bond markets, all these other things. It's very rare for me to wake up in the morning, have a look at what happened to the US stock and bond market and for our market, not to absolutely mirror it completely during the day. And overnight, something happens in the US and it goes the other way. So from a financial market transmission, I suppose we could call it that, the effect is very, very clear. Economically, even though we could have the world's best policies in place in Australia, if the US and China and Europe and other associated countries get into some, awful dogfight over tariffs and other things, let alone
yeah,
anything more sinister than that, let's hope that there's nothing more sinister. But if it's a trade war and a diplomatic spat, if we can use that word, between countries, and Australia just gets caught in that. And the other thing that's occurred to me too is that just in the last couple of days, Australia, for better or worse, is a shoulder to shoulder ally with the US. Now,
yes,
if the US thing blows up and we say, look, we're going to be standing with the US, China, as we saw during the lobster and wine and tariff issue they had when they took a dislike to what Scott Morrison was doing
yeah,
5 or 6 years
yeah.
ago, apologies. They might say, well, stuff you, Australia, even though you're our, we're a major trading partner with you, we can do very well. We can get our iron ore from Brazil or somewhere else. And we get caught in the backwash of that. So that diplomacy is really, really important too. So
Yes.
the short answer is we are really dependent still on the global economy, even though we play our own game to a large part. We are still dependent. 25% of our exports, sorry, 25% of our GDP are exports. So that's a big part of our economy.
Yeah. And then, of course, there is, as you say, that very fragile balance between our relationship with China as well. And
Yep.
I don't know what the answer is, but I guess I'm just saying to you is there some way, for example, there's a lot of talk at the moment from progressives, that we should be getting out of the AUKUS agreement, which I know isn't quite your wheelhouse, but strategically, I guess, those kinds of um, alliances do have an impact on economic policy as well. certainly in terms of where Trump's coming from, I guess. So,
Yeah.
what if we were tomorrow to say, okay, well, this person now in charge of the US is, and the free world is is imbalanced, and we really need to kind of sever those ties.
Yeah.
Would it be possible for Australia to, to kind of move ahead in other markets and deal with other people and find its own way? Is that even, or is that too pie in
Oh,
the sky?
look, I think it's hard to do that. From my understanding, it's very, very difficult. And I'll go back to the good old days of Paul Keating and his engagement with Asia, that strategy that he put in place
Yes.
when he was Treasurer and Prime Minister. And it sort of hasn't happened much. I know John Howard got rid of it, and then the Morrison, Abbott, whatever crowd also downplayed it a lot too. And that was an acknowledgement from Keating back then that there's the vibrant, the engine of the global economy over that time, and it's proven to be correct, is Asia. And here we are, we've got instead of the tyranny of distance, we've got the blessing of proximity to Asia. We're right really close to them,
Mm.
and we can form investment ties, trade ties, and even some diplomatic ties with the
Yep.
region. And
Yep.
it's to our advantage to do that. So, in a funny way, that going off to wars in faraway Europe and things like that, well, hopefully we don't do that ever again. Hopefully, there's no need to do that ever again. But that's sort of to say that, realizing that, and what we produce too, a lot of the people in Asia want to buy, and it's raw materials, it's food, it's
Mm.
education services, it's tourism services, the whole stuff that we've got here are highly desirable to Asia. And we've sort of, with the exception of China, which is sort of more good luck than good management, we've let the other parts of it slip. So our trade
Mm.
relationships with Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, these India, huge
Indonesia.
parts of the global economy and growing faster than everywhere else, by the way. So in their 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 growth is something that we should just sort of hook our trailer to and just sort of ride along with it. And
Mm.
alas, we haven't done that, or haven't done it as well as we should. And that's probably it's easy to blame the corporate world for that because it's the business sector that does it. But they need a little bit of steering from the government to do it well.
So it's possible? Hey?
Oh, look, it's possible. It's going to take a long time, and you don't burn your bridges with the US either. That alliance is important still, and just because we've got a nut job in the White House doesn't mean that you sort of end the relationship, and you hope that it is only for 4 years. God, that's a long time, isn't it?
A
And you
very
get
long
someone
time.
more sensible and normal there in years to come. So yes, it might be a little bit too short-sighted just to sort of bin that relationship or scale it back too much. You can do a few things that are a little bit more subtle, but I think the big relationship has to stay a little longer.
Do you think it's possible that Trump himself will ease back on these sort of major pronouncements of huge tariffs on everybody that doesn't agree with him once the people that are backing him, such as let's say Bezos, for example, whose main business is actually coming from China, and that will impact his business. Do you think it's possible that he will actually kind of get a bit more rational as time goes on?
Look, I don't think so.
No.
There's two things that strike me uh, amid all the noise and bluster and all these other things that we see every day. And they are that he does have a real problem about the US trade deficit, and it's big
Yeah.
and getting larger. And that's why he loves tariffs so much, because he thinks that if I put a tariff, it'll stop import or slow down the rate of imports. Local American firms will make that stuff instead under the protection of tariff barriers. Therefore, our trade balance will improve. Now, that's wrong in many senses, but he believes it. So I don't think he's going to go back on that, even if the Bezos and Musk with his cars in China and all these other things. I don't think he won't go back on it, or it'll be very, very marginal. Or if he so tariffs are going to be a big thing, and I think they're going to get bigger over time. Gosh, he's only been in the White House for 3 weeks, and look what he's done already.
I
If in
know.
6 to 12 months he finds that, oh, I'll put the tariffs up to 50%, 80%, who knows? He'll do it because he wants to correct that trade balance. The other thing that's linked to that somewhat, and he looks back to the, 100 plus years ago when the US got most of its revenue from tariffs.
Mm.
And income taxes were, I think, either non-existent or remarkably low. And he wants to use the revenue that he gets from tariffs to cut income taxes towards zero. And
Yes,
yeah,
but
which is
wasn't
absolutely
that
absurd, which is absolutely crazy, ridiculous, absurd, and embarrassing. If he was doing a year 10 economics exam and wrote that, he'd get naught out of 10 for it. But nonetheless, he's the president, he can do it. So I think
okay.
that those wacky policies will continue because I don't
But
think he's going to change his mind on those two things.
But won't those policies also have a detrimental effect on, the cost of living in the States? Because, of course,
Yes.
they don't have the industry that they had back when they were having, getting these higher tariffs and had lower. Sorry, I mean, I'm not an economist, but I think
No,
that's
no, no.
pretty
You're spot on.
straightforward.
It'll hurt the US economy. And the thing that that we know from tariff policy is when you think about it too, that if an industry does reasonably well in the US because it's got a tariff barrier against this its international competitors who are producing the same goods
Yep.
presumably cheaper, or else you wouldn't need the tariff, obviously. Then it creates a whole lot of inefficiency and poor productivity. I don't want to dig into the sort of
No, no,
nitty
no,
gritty of
no.
economics here, but if you've got an industry that's sort of completely protected because of import bans or very high tariffs, you sit back and you produce goods with you don't give a damn because you know you're the only producer and you're going to be protected by Donald Trump. So that the US has had a fantastic productivity story for decades. It is a vibrant, dynamic economy. Whatever else is going on there, it is a very vibrant economy. And so these tariffs run the risk of protecting the businesses that you don't want to protect.
Mm,
So again, it takes a few years for this to show up so that in 3 and 5 years' time, we might have these really inefficient industries in the US,
yep.
poor productivity, higher prices, higher inflation, obviously, and because of that, higher interest rates. So the US could well become one of these high interest rate countries because of the whole tariff debacle that's going on right now.
Yeah, right. So, okay, well, let's get off Trump for a while because
Yes,
it's
please.
a bit depressing to say the least. So back in Australia,
Yeah,
are there, okay, so there's a few issues here, I think. One is that every time the Labor Party tries to kind of move forward with things such as, say, negative gearing, okay,
yep,
um, and obviously in the past they talked about franking credits, and that didn't go so well.
yep.
But yet home ownership is I think, going to be quite a big election issue. Do you think it's possible that they can come up with something that will translate, for Mr. and Mrs. Average in terms of home ownership?
It's a funny one, and I just heard Albo at question time just a
Ah,
short while
really?
ago
Okay, I
saying they're
missed
not
it
going to do
today.
anything on negative gearing.
Yep.
So I think the short answer for this election at least is no. And he just reiterated the fact that they're spending $32 billion on new housing, including affordable social housing, encouraging a more rapid rezoning, because that's the critical issue. We need to build more houses, or it's one of the critical
Mm,
issues anyway. On housing, and the other thing too, which it's a bit of a silent, I won't call it a majority, but a silent big swag of the electorate, own a house. And even if they've got a bit of a mortgage on it, they still own it. If the mortgage is 5 or 10 years old, they've got a lot of equity in their house because house prices have
yes.
gone up so much. So be careful. And even though there's these occasional sort of qualitative surveys done that people, I wish houses were cheaper so my kids could buy one, even though my house is worth millions of dollars.
Mm,
I don't think those people, when the reality hit that their house dropped 30%, would be all that happy.
yeah.
So there's that dilemma that you're going to be, by definition, like a lot of economic policy, if you're taking away something and the value of your house is one thing, if we were trying to make housing more
Mm.
affordable. while a few people will cheer you for it, um, a lot of people will boo you for it. So this question, I think, so I think that housing is such a cumbersome thing to change to. I think the strategy of building more houses is fundamentally important to addressing that issue, including social and housing for people in dire need. That's a really important part of it.
Mm,
And the other thing is that, again, that which is what they've done, really well. So Claire and Elle's sort of now sort of trying to fast track these sort of things. They're building houses where people want to live, like infield. We mightn't have much land, but we've got a lot of air. So build apartments and things, and people say, "Oh, what a backyard and all the rest." Fine, but if you look at New York and London and Tokyo and places like that, everyone lives in an apartment and it's not bad. It might be different to what we want, but I think if we're really to genuinely address housing and people want to, and the beauty about high rise or apartments is that you can live near a train station, near work, around the corner from a coffee shop, the things that people want to do, rather than, there's nothing wrong with this, but out at whoop whoop in suburbia, where the public transport's poor, the schools aren't many, your job's nowhere near there, your shops aren't near there. So that suburban sprawl will
mm,
continue, no doubt. But I think what we've got to try to do is build in the closer parts because that's where people want to live. And the only way you can do that is a little bit of rezoning and putting in apartments. And I think that's what, they're trying to do.
mm. But I think, there is also quite a cohort of voters who are younger who
Yeah.
are certainly having difficulty, following the Australian dream, not just, it's not only an American dream of owning your own home.
Yeah.
And uh, do you think that enough's being done for them?
It comes back to the supply issue. So again, the question is, what do you do to make housing more affordable? Because I think, buying a house is one of the best financial things you can do. So if you can possibly do it, do it. I think that's what every financial planner or advisor would say. Buy a house or buy a dwelling to live in, not a house, apartment, buy something to live in. Because that's one of the best things that you can do. And if you buy it when you're 30, hang on to it till you reach retirement age. Hopefully by then you've paid it off and probably gone up a bit in value too, so you'll be fine. And you might have even upgraded once or something like that too.
Yeah.
So I think housing of ownership is part of the strategy. And in the interim, you've got to rent until you can buy your first house in many ways. So if you've got more supply, and it comes down to this very simple equation. If we had a big increase in the number of houses being built, I should mention demand, and this gets into the slightly curly issue of
Mm,
immigration, what the optimal level of immigration is relative to that immigration level. But if you build more houses than you have people coming in, then of course you've got too much supply. Price goes down for both rental and the sale price. So that's the other part, which I think, interestingly enough, there's almost bipartisan support from Dutton and Albo on immigration. Dutton's got an immigration target that's only about 10,000 less, which in the scheme of things is the same number.
yes.
It's not much. But I think we need a sensible debate on immigration too, because I look at immigration like good red wine. You can occasionally have too much too quickly, and you have a hangover. And I think that surge that we saw after the COVID lockdowns was probably just the floodgates a bit too much. Um,
Right. Interesting.
and I think that created the housing price boom that we saw over the last couple of years because we
Yeah.
weren't building enough houses. So it's not just, there's an optimal level of immigration, and maybe we had it a little too high for a year or two, but it's
Mm,
now reverting to where it should be. So maybe that in itself will just see demand return to normal. If we build this sort of 220, 250,000 houses a year around the country, that'll help to fix the problem. So for the young folk out there, um, you can address their cost of living pressures by other means because I despise HECS. So lowering HECS is something that's a really good thing that's out there.
could they do
Uh,
away with HECS?
well, or you revert to what it was 25 years ago, whatever. A couple of $1,000 is fine because there were people going to university when it was free. They were
Well, you
goofing
and
off.
I went when it was free.
Oh, I went for free. Yes,
I went for
indeed.
free, not
Yep. So
later.
you make HECS just a nominal payment
Yeah.
to cover admin, not cover the teaching costs, and it won't even make it free. Yeah, but a HECS is just such a again using price signals. Put my economics hat on for a minute. Yeah, if the cost of something goes up,
Yes.
demand for it goes down. If the cost of getting yourself educated, skills, knowledge,
Mm.
expertise that we need in this services world, in the AI world, in technology, we need our population to be well educated, and the price of it goes up, demand goes down. So no wonder
Well,
we
it's
have fewer people going on to university at the exact time we need more of them going on to
That's
university.
right. And it's one of the reasons why we have higher immigration over the last few years is because we have skills
True.
shortages, which is one of the things that
Yes.
Dr. Abul Rizvi writes about for us as well.
Yes.
There is this kind of balance between, people go, oh, we don't need any more migrants because we haven't got enough jobs for the people
Yeah.
that are here. But in fact, sometimes, there's a
Yeah.
imbalance between the kinds of skill set that is, and the training available for people here because you're not going to train them overnight. You're not going to get the skills
Correct.
of people that you need perhaps in AI
Well,
or,
I hope
you know.
nobody's saying zero immigration because I don't. Yeah, that's dreadful. But so what that optimal number is, 250, 300, 350. I'm not completely sure.
Yeah.
When we had 400 and 500,000 coming in each year for 2 consecutive years, that was sort of like very hard to digest for an economy to digest, if you like. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So
um,
I know we don't have a great deal of time left. So there's a
oh,
couple
I've
of
been talking too much. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. So, because it's just, these are all they're hot issues at the moment, aren't they? And one of the issues too, I guess, is, and you've discussed this quite a lot, is the role of the RBA.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. How is that going to influence, from here on in, leading up to the election?
Yeah.
How do you think that might pan
Look,
out?
I wrote that piece that looked at the last 10 elections, and it showed that interest rate changes within 3 and 12 months before voting day sort of didn't have a strong relationship with the election outcome. You would think that a rate hike before an election would be bad for the incumbent, and a rate
Yes,
cut would be good for the incumbent. And it sort of only held about half the time, that
right.
relationship. So history says that if you get a rate cut before an election, look, it probably helps, but it may not be the defining factor that sees the incumbent getting re-elected. And of course, that's what we're talking about right now, that with a rate cut, well, almost certainly, oh God, famous last words, almost certainly going to be delivered on the 18th of February and probably another one on the 1st of April, which is again when the RBA meet after that.
Mm,
Then given these cost of living issues that we mentioned that we were talking about before, that the felt experience rather than the macroeconomic experience. So people I know, friends, family, are talking about this interest rate cut. They love to have a conversation about interest rates, and they're hanging out for it. And they've been hurting, genuinely hurting. And
I
these are
think
people
so.
on
I think a
decent
lot.
incomes. Yep, they're on
Yep.
good incomes. They're not making mega bucks, but they're on okay. They're doing the right thing. They've materially adjusted their spending to make their repayments on their mortgages. So they've cut
Mm,
back on just about everything else, and grown when their mortgage repayment is due. And they're
yep.
looking forward to a couple of interest rate cuts. And I don't think they're going to rush out and spend that money, by the way, either. I think they're just going to use that to reduce their reduce the stress on their
Right.
mortgage repayment. So you might just
So
say if you're on the size of, I can't remember the size of your mortgage you need, but just say you get $100 a month reduction in your monthly repayments. That's not really the one that you're going to do cartwheels down, Collins Street drinking Dom Perignon, are you? It'll just be that breath of relief. And if you get a couple of them, we're saving a bit, and then eventually you'll get to the position where there's genuine. If we get 3 or 4 rate cuts, which I do think we need,
yeah.
at least during the course of the next 6 to 9 months, then finally you get people saving 300, 400, $500 a month and saying, well, I've got a bit of spare money now. I can now afford to do a few nice things that I haven't been doing for the last couple of years.
Mm, mm. And
And I,
and
and I think And I think the Treasurer would love an interest rate cut. I think they can go and say, just to sort of round out that the politics of it, is that they can go out and say, look, we've had our tough medicine. We inherited an inflation disaster. It's taken us a while to get it there. But look now, we've got inflation back under control, and
Yep.
the Independent Reserve Bank has cut interest rates. And I think that is a powerful message that
Mm. Do you think
Albo and Jim
it's
Chalmers
likely?
can take. Oh, yeah, I do. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
As I look at my screens now, I see for the where are we? The 18th of February, because I've got my little thing always open the corner of my screen here. 18th of February, it's about a 96% chance priced in. It's almost done. It's sort of like you're 5 lengths clear in the Melbourne Cup with 10 metres to go. You know, the jockey could fall off, you never know, but it looks as if it's almost a done deal.
And just generally, on that, yes, we've talked about the economy and, how important all those sort of world markets and et cetera are in terms of determining where Australia sits. But in terms of, I guess, the election, do you think that Labor's traditional base, which are in fact those that are doing it tough, with this cost of living crisis, which we are in a bit of a crisis, even though I'm reticent to keep repeating that phrase because it's
Yep,
bandied about very easily. But we are, things have gone up,
sure.
and people are struggling, as we've said. Do you think that they could do more in terms of social policy, and will that
Oh,
negatively impact the economy?
yep, that's the other thing that I think we're going to see. And if we do go through to what is it, the 17th of May for the election day, Jim Chalmers will deliver a budget on the 25th of March. And even if he doesn't deliver a formal budget, there'll be some sort of major economic statement. But I think that will include things like an extension of the electricity subsidy, which a rebate, whatever. That's been very, very popular and it
Yeah.
worked well. And it wasn't that expensive to the budget. So all of this combination of things that you think about are going to be very important. Childcare has been another one that hits those, well, younger folk more than perhaps others. So there's that affordability issue that improves workforce participation, particularly women. And we look at the gender gap closing in only 3 years. It's been quite a remarkable move. We're a long way from equality, but workforce participation's higher. The wage gap's narrowed a little bit more. And I think those sort of policies are ones that people will resonate with, and
Yes.
anything else that they can do just to take some of the financial pain off a number of people until these interest rate cuts bite. So they probably, or some of them, childcare will be there forever, but things like the electricity rebate will probably only be there for another 12 months. And then it ends when people are feeling a little bit better. And I think that sort of temporary and targeted policy, if we can use those terms, would be a very good thing to deliver in the budget.
Okay. And so you're fairly optimistic that it's possible that we're not going to end up with a Dutton government?
Look, I do think that Labor would be more likely to win than not. They've got a pretty chunky majority if you exclude the Teal. So if you just look at the raw seats that Labor and the Coalition have, they've got a sizable lead there. So they have to lose probably a good 10, 12, 14 seats for Dutton to have any chance of forming a minority government. And
Mm,
that's a big ask. That okay, in Victoria, there's a risk that the Labor Party does get a little bit of a backwash from the state government here. But in WA, they're probably going to hold most of their seats. South Australia, the same. Tassie, probably break even. New South Wales, they might lose a couple, maybe. And in Queensland, they don't have too many to lose. So,
mm,
and the fact that we've got a change of government at the state level, I think just under their breath, the federal Labor Party would say, look at what Christofoli's doing now. And for a couple of those marginal seats, we do have a sort of a little bit of a lived experience that people vote one way in the state election and another way in the federal. So having had Labor in the state for a decade, the state government for a decade,
yes.
terrific. That's changed. People looking at what Christopher is doing now, it might just sway, and all you've got to do is sway 2 or 3%, and then all of a sudden Labor could pick up a seat or two there. So look, I
Mm,
think it'll be a minority government, but I think that the Teals, who will probably get mostly re-elected, and under the Greens and other independents, and maybe even a few more independents might get elected this time
Yes.
around. Enough of them will lean towards Albanese and not Dutton, and on there to do with things like, again, on the environment, on gender equality and things like that, where Labor have a clear advantage.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. So, all right. Well, it's certainly a lot to think about and unpack there, Stephen. But thank you so much. But before we go, do you have a mantra that you live by?
Oh, look, I've learned over time not to not to tolerate injustices, and they can be little ones or big ones, and to speak out against them when you get a chance. And I guess it's part of a function of being a little bit older. I can say things that don't jeopardize my career. Whereas I know a number of people who are at work, if they say something, they're going to get sacked. And indeed, there's a couple of very high profile cases going on right now with the ABC and other places as well, which we won't go into. So you're restrained in what you can say. For me, I can, when I see something that's wrong, I call it out, and okay, I probably offend a few too many people by doing that, but I'm at least true to myself and true to the sort of, oh, without being too grandiose, good basic decency, which I think we're sadly lacking, and in fact going the wrong direction with what's happening in the US.
Yeah.
That basic decency, the politeness, and calling out bad people for doing bad things when you see it.
Standing
And
up
that
to
can be,
power, which is what we do.
indeed, indeed. And praising people when they do a bloody good job. So I see something, for all my sins, I'm still on X or Twitter. Don't know how much longer, but I'm still there. When I see someone doing or writing something interesting or a stimulating bit of research and have a look at this. This is really good. Have a look at this
Yeah.
fabulous chart. I love charts. Have a look at this particular thing. And, but then when someone does something stupid, like, Stephen Hamilton, the economist, who's sort of seemingly got a one-track mind when it comes to interest rates, they can only ever go up.
Oh,
I
yes.
call him out.
Absolutely.
Love your
We
work,
love it.
Stephen, but anyway,
Well, that's why we love having you with us at Independent Australia, Stephen. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
great being here. Lots of fun. Thank you.